The Templin Institute investigates alternate worlds, and that includes those we haven't had a chance to visit for ourselves quite yet. And with a few tantalizing details beginning to leak out from a universe I'm looking forward to, now seems like a good opportunity to give my thoughts on what's been released so far and speculate on what's to come in Starfield. The broad details from this universe is that in the year 2330, a region of space known as the Settled Systems is split between two nations, the United Colonies and the Freestar Collective. 20 years previously, in 2310, these two factions fought a devastating conflict known as the Colony War. While some kind of armistice was signed, this peace remains tenuous, and there is the chance that the Freestar Collective, the United Colonies, and neutral parties in between might get caught up in another war. Now, there's plenty to talk about here, but let's start with the Settled Systems themselves. First, I love that the current year is 2330. I think this fits into a sweet spot that I've talked about at greater length before. When universes like Starfield take place too soon into the future, it raises questions like, how did all this happen in such a small amount of time? Whereas too far into the future, and you run the risk of having society and technology feel like they've stagnated and not enough's changed for what's supposed to be such a massive amount of time. But in this instance, as we look through the remaining details and images and ask ourselves, does it make sense that this takes place 300 years in what would be our future? I think the answer is going to be yes, or at least most of the time. Next up, I really like that the Settled Systems only encompass about a 50 light-year radius around the Earth. This seems like a pretty reasonable limit of human exploration within the time frame we previously discussed. It always strikes me as a bit odd that when you have a civilization that encompasses the entire galaxy, a region home to more than 100 billion stars, only a small handful seem to be of any importance. The comparatively smaller size of the Settled Systems is in my mind actually a bonus, because I think it'll have the effect of making the universe feel a bit more cohesive, and easier to understand how each star system affects its neighbors. When we get to the two major powers though, this is where I start seeing some warning signs. Let's start just with their names and emblems for a second. Everything seems kinda generic. United Colonies doesn't exactly say much, but that's not necessarily a strike against it. Plenty of real-world organizations have generic names too. United Nations, for example. But their insignia commits the cardinal sin that I have railed against for ages. The United Colonies is supposed to be a true melting pot, whose citizens come from every race, creed, and culture. And yet the best symbolism they can come up with is the acronym of their name, in English, and a star. And just as an aside, it's kind of funny how the letters UC have been modified to fit better around that star, and as a result, look kind of awkward on their own. Get rid of those letters and I think you immediately see a big improvement. The Freestar Collective has a slightly more interesting name, but as we'll get into in a second, it's a little on the nose for what this nation is supposed to be. And their emblem, in this case, I think is actually weakened by the inclusion of a star. I mean, yeah, star is literally in their name, but design-wise, it feels slightly out of place, especially next to the comparatively more detailed bird, or space eagle, or whatever that is. Actually, if you take my suggestions and then swap them, I think you actually have better symbolism for both sides. But my main concern here is the vast disparity in the capabilities of each side, and how they were supposed to have fought an inconclusive war. The United Colonies is supposed to be the stronger of the two, with a much more powerful economy and political system. The Freestar Collective, by contrast, is a loose confederacy of 3 star systems that likely only came together in the first place to resist the United Colonies, with nothing binding them together beyond that. Personally, I find it much more interesting when both sides in a situation like this are equally powerful. To me, the United States versus the Soviet Union is a more compelling conflict compared to the United States versus Grenada. And the disparity between the two sides is incredibly obvious in the design of their two capital cities. The United Colonies is based in New Atlantis, and this definitely feels like the center of an interstellar civilization. A bustling hub of commerce, industry, and culture. And just as another aside here, I'm not a fan of the name. When you have settlements that have been inhabited by humans for hundreds or even thousands of years, it can sometimes make sense when their names in a modern context don't really seem to fit, or have just been lost entirely. The etymology of London, for example, has been lost to antiquity, but New Atlantis is likely a purpose-built capital, or at the very least a planned colony. It's hard to imagine what relevance the term Atlantis would have to any of the United Colony's citizens. I guess it just sounds kinda tacky, and I'm expecting everyone there to try to sell me some bedazzled seashells or something. But where the United Colonies seem to have an advanced megalopolis for their capital, the Freestar Collective is not so lucky. Their capital is Aquila City, which really doesn't seem like much of a city at all. In fact, it more resembles a village from the Middle Ages than a modern city. They don't even have paved roads. You got a bunch of muck and pools of water coalescing around the various buildings. I understand that the Freestar Collective is not as centralized and powerful as the United Colonies, said to be home to those who prioritize personal freedom and individuality above all. But I think it strains credibility that a settlement of any size, of any importance, wouldn't feature something that's been integral to city design since the Roman Empire. It doesn't seem impossible to me that you might have a nation that prioritizes personal freedom and individuality, but still has the resources to prevent your feet from getting covered in slop the moment you step out your door. So going back to discussing that disparity, I just don't understand how the United Colonies didn't immediately walk all over the Freestar Collective the second war was declared. I kinda worry the eventual explanation might not make a lot of sense. Yeah, sure, the United Colonies had that vast military-industrial complex, a massive economy, and an overwhelming population, but you gotta hand it to that plucky group of freighter captains from the Freestar Collective. They just wanted it more. But while the lack of details so far raises these kinds of questions, I think that's the exciting part. Regardless of my minor nitpicking, I'm still excited to join up with Constellation, one of the last groups still pushing the boundaries of human exploration across the settled systems. And it's still interesting to not really know what kind of universe this is. I had initially expected something very grounded, and yet hearing about other factions like the Ecliptic Mercenaries, the Pirates of the Crimson Fleet, and the fanatical religious zealots of House Varun, I think I might have been completely off there, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. But even though my speculation and observation in cases like these is always invariably proven to be correct, I'd like to hear your thoughts. What's your take on the settled systems? Do you like the emblem of the United Colonies? Does it make sense the Freestar Collective survived the Colony War? Are you a freedom-loving individualist who thinks paved roads are a terrible symptom of government overreach? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time, this has been a Templin Dispatch.